body keeps score, right? So it's just a way of our body telling us there's a wound here.
Colonization is probably the reason you're single.
No, really.
Welcome to the first episode of the podcast Illuminates the Mind with me, your host Helen Kathure, your ever curious soul. I hope you're as curious as me. And today I'm with the wonderful, the gorgeous,
Okay.
the intelligent Michelle.
Thank you so much, Helen. Thank you so
Welcome,
much.
welcome.
I'm so glad to be here.
Mhm.
So I hope we have a good session.
Yes, Michelle, tell us about you.
So I'm Michelle, the gorgeous, the curious one. I'm a market researcher and I'm just a passionate African about all African things.
Mm,
Yeah.
amazing. And that's exactly why I called you here, so that we can unpack the layered mess of the mind.
Of the African mind.
No, with an African perspective.
Mm.
Yeah.
Cool.
And today I'd like us to discuss about decolonization and the African psyche. So we're getting into the mental health month for the whole of May. And you were like, okay, if we're talking about mental health, where did it begin? Because majority of the time we think that colonization is history. It's something of the past. It's about land that they took or the people that they colonized at the time. But we don't realize what colonization does to us on an individual level, on a day-to-day basis. My gosh.
Where do we start? You said it so beautifully because when you look at colonization, we look at it as a static process in history. But if you look at our perspectives on relationships or our aspirations, even our identity, you're like, is this what you're calling the past? This is the present and the future if we continue on this pace.
Yeah.
So I like how you put it. You put that.
Thank you. There's someone that I saw that I read yesterday that said, we are a people who are living on someone else's software. If our mind is hardware, then we're having someone else's software. And it could be the beginning of mental health crisis, actually, because how do we navigate our own minds if we don't know who we are, if we have no identity, no sense of belonging? So, Michelle, I want to ask you, like, what do you think about colonization, decolonization, and the psyche, specifically the African psyche? Where do you think it begins? How do you think we can begin to unwrap this? Yeah. Layered.
Yeah, layered, nuanced, rich. I like how you structured that question.
Yeah.
Except I wouldn't say I look at colonization and decolonization as some sort of loop. I wouldn't say we have a pinpoint of this is where we start. But I would say I think we have to first of all radically accept that colonization wounded us in ways we are not even still ready to accept. Right? I mean, you already said they took our land, but like we can get land. Can we get ourselves back? Can we get our culture, our spirituality?
What about our internal terrain?
Right?
If you just look at the
yes,
physical,
you have the land, but it's a mess and chaos inside. Then what?
Yeah.
So I would say, first of all, you have to accept, and I know that's like a big blow to the ego, because let's be honest, right? Because colonization is white consciousness coming to subordinate the African consciousness, right? So you have to agree that actually we have been inferior in this specific epoch or time in history, right? So we have to accept, first of all, we were colonized. Because I think some of us are still in denial, especially because I have had the unfortunate chance of interacting that African minds that sounded like they were white. I'm like, you realize in the geopolitics of the globe, you're African, and that comes with great disadvantages sometimes. So I'd say, one, we have to accept we were colonized, and this is what it cost us. Some are obvious. I mean, here they just called me Michelle. Look at my skin and tell me why. Right?
Yeah.
Because I know that's like the small part of it, right? So now I'm Michelle, right? I was raised Catholic, so now what? I chant white gods and I'm praying to Saint Peter and Saint Augustine. If we go through my lineage, just where would we get an Augustine? Yeah, right. And that's like the more obvious part. So we have to accept that it took something from us, okay, and then start. Do we want to heal? right? So once we say we want to heal, we want to, I would say decolonization or decoloniality is, I would put it in two ways. One is decentering whiteness, and two is recentering ourselves. Recentering, whether we want to call it blackness, Africanness, does the name really matter, anyways? Yeah, so that's where I would say we start. And in terms of the psyche, again, I would want us to say we are carrying around a very wounded psyche. And once we do not, if we are moving around in denial about that, where are we going? Right? Because I don't know, one of my favorite things when I watched Scandal, there was this episode, they said the most dangerous thing that can happen to a person in crisis is not being aware they're in crisis. So are we aware we are in crisis?
The perfect slave is the one who doesn't know they're a
Right?
slave.
Because now, in fact, it's better if they have illusions of freedom because they're not resisting. So I was getting ahead of myself. Good. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I like what you've said, because I think the beginning of healing, whatever kind of healing, whether it's physical or mental trauma healing, it starts with acceptance. And that's the hardest part of it. But I think once you do it, that's when the next steps are able to follow. Right?
Unfold. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely.
So I think we dove right into the solutions, like how to unpack. But I think if we are looking at someone who does not know how colonization affects to them on a day-to-day basis, how does that really look like? Like, for example, someone is new. I think we are getting excited because we've been in this decoloniality spaces a lot, so we have learned a lot of it. But imagine someone who has never thought about colonization other than the history book that they read maybe in class 8. So, and then we're trying to tell people that coloniality is affecting you right now in your house, in your bed sitter, or in your one bedroom. So, what would you say that looks like for the psyche, and how does that manifest? Maybe financially, the decisions that you make on a day to day, the people you choose to love, or how you see yourself, or how you see yourself, and how does that affect us on, let's say, on a global level? Like, for example, how you see yourself manifests to other people as well. How can people love you if you don't love yourself? How can people respect you how can people see you
if you're not seeing
if you
yourself?
don't see yourself? So how does that manifest on it? How does this trauma that was inflicted on the African consciousness or the African psyche manifest now in 2025?
That was a very deep, full, rich question. Like my mind is just like, I'm getting all these ideas. One, I like, first of all, I like that you said it, or this is how I'd put it. One, to even have this conversation, I hope we know it talks a lot about our privilege. Let's even just having this conversation a lot. It's a very
Actually,
privileged conversation to have, right?
yes.
And it comes out from how you've said people in their bed sitters in Meru who are trying to pay their May rent. You think they care? You think they're even aware that, or do you think in trying to solve their daily problems, whether it's hand to mouth or just feeding their families, and you're telling them, this is because of colonization, they're going to look at you like, I mean, sure, but like my kids have to eat. The schools are opening what, or they have already opened. So I like that you've said that. And how it manifests itself. And I think it's part of being African, right? I think in my trying to understand what does being African mean, being African is a very fragmented identity, right? I mean, you're African, and then you're pre-colonial African, and then you're colonial African identities, and then post-colonial. And as far as they manifest, I would think maybe that's why some of us are walking around with like anxieties and depressions, especially because now you're not carrying just yours because the economy is not working. And if you look at the imperialism the West is doing to Africa even today, that aside, we're also carrying our parents, their traumas, right? And they're carrying their grandparents, right? So of course, yeah, the body keeps score, right? So it's just a way of our body telling us there's a wound here, there's a healing that needs to happen. Where do we start? But now, if you don't know that, anger often is rational. It's communicating to you something needs to be done, right? But of course, they're very angry. And there's a sort of, I don't know if you've faced this or you've experienced it, when you're unaware of something that troubles you. So it's a sort of space, like they do not know how to navigate. But again, let's be honest, the average African is stuck surviving. So, because let's be honest, imagine going to the generation of our parents talking about mental health. Financial health and freedom is not even secured. You want us to treat your mind? But anyway, so yeah, I would say it manifests in like what we'd call mental disorders, but I would just call predictable reactions to injustice, to our African identities and our Africanness.
Ooh, that's amazing. You said a lot of things that I'd like to get into deeper.
Dive
Yeah.
in.
Number one, the body keeps score.
Absolutely.
Number two, we are carrying our parents and our grandparents and whatever it is that your grandmother went through, you're carrying it epigenetically.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and for the people maybe who've never heard of epigenetics, it's the science that external factors can affect you directly or physically or to the cellular level, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if I've explained it
Yeah,
well.
you inherit them genetically.
Yeah, actually, there was a study that was done with mice where there was a mice that was put in a cage and then was being given some cheese. But every time, like you would introduce the cheese, they would also introduce a bit of shock, which would cause pain to the mouse. And they did that for a number of times until the mouse got it subconsciously or unconsciously that once you see the cheese, that's danger.
Yeah.
Don't go
I saw that
towards
study.
it.
It was interesting. I think
Yeah.
even 5 generations after the mice that this experiment was done on, they were still afraid of the cheese.
Exactly.
That was so interesting.
So the thing is, so after some time of doing that, the mice stopped going towards the cheese, and then
And they had never faced the shock.
the mouse was mated.
Yeah.
And then the father's, let's assume the mice was male, the father's RNA was transferred to the kid. And now the kid has this memory epigenetically, which means that when the later, up to I think 5 generations of that mouse, whenever they will see the cheese, they know it's danger, even though they'd never experienced the shock. And maybe people will say, we're not mice.
Like,
But majority of the time, there's a reason why they use mice and guinea pigs and doves for their experiments when they're doing psyche experiments, because they're kind of somehow closer to the human
absolutely.
to some level.
Yes.
To some, of course, not 100%, but it's also true for like humans that the parents are able to pass, you see, epigenetically the experiences that they've had, which means if they're storing trauma in their cells, you have it. You may not know it consciously, but it is there.
It is there.
Yeah.
It is there. And your unawareness only makes it worse.
Absolutely. Because how do you heal something that you don't know?
It's like, how do free slaves even rebel? I'm free. Kumbe, you're a house negro.
My gosh. Brings us to the point. Remember when in religion they say the curses follow you up to the 5th generation, and I'm like, that's epigenetics doing that to you.
Literally.
Yeah.
And you know what's crazy? Even outside the context of epigenetics, you're raised, because the psychologists will tell you your environment will literally influence you. So even if, assuming by for some whatever reason, okay, you got away with it genetically, you're still socialized and brought up in an environment of that trauma. So it's gonna be passed down, especially because your parents don't even understand it's there, or they're not even aware. Again, why? Because they were busy surviving. Right? Because our parents, I'm assuming most of our parents are like, let's say Gen X. So they're literally, their parents went through colonization. Because I think when we talk about colonization, we look at it as this something that happened in our history. But I'm like, we have people who are alive, who are not even that old, that went through these things, right? Our parents, if they're a bit older, if they're like boomers, they've seen it. I mean, we just got independence in 63. You can even, in historical years, that's Jana, literally.
True. Yeah. So I think we've looked into how colonization can affect us directly, and that's through maybe getting anxiety, mental health disorders. Can we look at indirectly? Okay, now you have anxiety. which means you're not able to make rational decisions majority of the time. How does that translate into your finances? How does that translate into your love life, your relationship? Man, and we're struggling with love.
Uh,
Strange view.
yeah,
So,
absolutely.
in short, maybe what I'm trying to say is
Mm-hmm.
colonization is probably the reason you're single.
No, really,
The
yeah.
reason you're
It's probably
broke.
why your self-esteem is in the gutters.
Yeah.
Right?
So let's talk about that. How
Mm.
does that translate into now the people, the things that people seem to care about most, which is survival? How does what happened during colonization affect your chances of survival now? Again, when you're looking at the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you need to fix survival first for you
Yeah, you're not getting
to proceed
fulfilled
with.
and you've not eaten.
Yeah. So if survival is
In the gutters.
then everything else is
Yeah.
so. How does that translate now to what people are actually going through, or what Gen Z are actually
Actually
going
going
through right
through.
now? I don't know if you knew, but suicide is the number one killer of Gen Z right now.
I was not aware of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, let that sink in. Whoa, okay.
Yeah, which is sad. Which is sad.
To say the least, sad. Also, to me, it's a symptom of a much bigger issue.
Mm.
Yeah. Oh, damn.
Yeah, that is now globally. It's yeah. So yeah, what can you say about that? How does it manifest on the things that people seem to care most
Most
about?
about
Finances,
sense,
love,
community.
go on.
Yeah. I mean, I like that you said that, especially because, like, in this town, like in Nairobi, for young people, our idea of dreams, for some reason, is they are always centered around proximity to whiteness. And okay. And I understand, again, because of the white supremacist systems of the world, proximity to whiteness will always have its perks. I'm not denying that, right? But if you look at the accents we are borrowing, like, you've not even been outside of this continent, and for some reason you have a London slang, but when someone comes out with a thick Kisii or Meru accent, suddenly it's kienyeji, right? Or by the dreams and aspirations we have, like, you want to travel this way, or how we even, if someone tells you they went to Oxford and another person tells you they went to your end, suddenly you've pedestalized the other person. Why? Their proximity to whiteness and their having existed in white systems. So even our ideas of love are informed by Victorian traditions, right? If you look at all the shenanigans on diamonds and roses and these white centric performances of femininity,
The white dress
these are not
on your head.
ours.
Yeah.
Yes. So I think, I want us to a bit go back. It's I want us to look at when we're looking at a mirror as an African person, I want us to see Africanness not as something denigrating or an identity to work on or polish or tame. You know how they came here and told us we are evil, we are ugly, we are primitive, and right? So I want us to have, and this is where I've always, by the way, been a champion for. Yes, I want this, but why do I want them? Right? Because again, I'm not even judging people who want proximity to whiteness, but it's because for so long we've been told whiteness is the way to live. Whiteness is the identity. It's the standard. It's the epitome of all these things. So when you look at having dreams of, I have to do my master's in London, I have to come and ask myself, where do I get this? In what context and environment, which in this context is colonization, did I get it? I think that's where we'd have to go back. But it manifests in various, again, our ideas of love. Someone has to pay. Mind you, we are Africans. As Africans, we have always lived communally. This whole idea of you have to take me to Inti and pay, we would have just gone to like our whole tribe, and me, I come with my vegetables, unilete, the warus, and the bananas, and we're okay. So all these things we're doing, we're like, are these ours? They're not. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. I think you've said something a bit controversial.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
But before I get into it, the issue of how we used to be before, maybe the question would be, do you think the solution would be going back to how we were? Or maybe remembering will just build our consciousness at this present moment? Because majority of people bring out the fact that things have changed. Society is no longer the same because the situations are different now. More facilities, there's social media, there's Technology.
Hala. We are tapping into the same consciousness.
Yeah. So,
Mhm.
so my question would be: is it about going back, or is it about remembering? Because how do you go forward if you don't know where you're coming from? Right. That's the first thing. There's something I'm happy that you mentioned of how we keep taking other people's history and imagining they're our own. Yeah, it's like there are people who say, I told you of there was a event I attended, and there were people who were saying, "Oh, we as women were killed during the witch hunts. We've always been, I don't know, all that, and I'm like, who's we?
Yeah.
Who's we? You live in Nairobi with me and you're telling me we were killed during the witch hunts as women? What are you talking about? That's white people history. So I'd like you to talk about the remembering part, but also what is the importance of remembering who our people were in a truthful manner, and not the propaganda that has been that was and is still being propagated by the people who are benefiting from African consciousness not growing. Yeah, what would you say would be, yeah, the role of remembering, the role of history, and is it about going back or is it about remembering?
I think so far, and you've asked beautiful, amazing questions, but this has to be my favorite, only because uh, 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 I think the term is idealizing escapism. That's how I would put it, right? And I'll get into it later, right? This is my favorite question you've asked so far, only because I've realized because we are stuck in like a colonial, I don't want to say post-colonial, but it's also technically post-colonial, okay? But because we're stuck in this colonial reality, we have a tendency to romanticize our pasts, right? And in remembering, and I think I love art, right? So I'll try to connect that with this. When I look at art, I always try to tell myself, this is what I'm looking at, but what do I want it to be, right? Because I believe because we are stuck in this subpar, dehumanizing reality, we have a tendency to think just rolling back the clock will solve our problems, right? And we have this tendency of romanticizing. Sometimes we're not even romanticizing the past; we are romanticizing what could have been, right? And so that's why I like that we've said, are we meant to roll back or to remember? Because for me, I think we're meant to remember so that we have a template of this is who we are and this is what we need to do to move our people forward. But I would not say rolling back, because now rolling back, times have changed. In fact, that just, it's like coming from one hole and digging another and thinking, oh, I've solved the problem. So we're not jumping from one hole to another. But I think it's an issue of, because let's be honest, in fact, I'm a feminist, right? You know this, right?
Yeah.
And I'm currently writing my book on feminism, centering African women. And I remember there's a chapter in it I call African femininities, right? And instinctively, just like when I was on my laptop on my keyboard, I remember writing about what is while speaking of African femininities, colonialism found its way there. I was like, so what is African femininities or femininity in the context of colonialism, right? And so it's a context of how do I put it? How, who are we, so that we understand where we are and where we can move. But just going back will not solve our problems. So, but then again, I say this only to kind of tell us, looking back, I don't think we need to be ready to see what we're not ready to see. I think, and I am a feminist, right? And one of the arguments we like to make is pre-colonial African communities or tribes were not patriarchal. But what if I roll back and find they were actually more patriarchal than colonial systems? Then what? So I think it's just about remembering so we can have a sense of identity. Now, I guarantee that identity will not be perfect, because identity is always in the step of becoming, but it's to remember, because now we are almost like people with no history. Think about it. Every time we speak of Africa, even that today, we are here speaking of Africa in the colonial context. It's as if Africa only started existing when we were subjected to white people's violence, right? So it's a thing of before white interruption, before colonialism, slavery, racism, white supremacy, when we were just as people, who are we? so that we understand, okay, these are our identities, these are our cultures, these are our spiritualities, these are our gender roles, this is how we deal with the existential reality of being here. I think so. So that I would say that's the role of remembering.
I'd like us to talk a little about what you just said about, I know you're a feminist, a staunch feminist,
Afro-feminist.
Afro-feminist. I'm glad you added that part,
Absolutely. Yeah.
Afro-feminism.
I'm an African woman. For my people, by my people. I have to start there.
Yeah, because majority of the time I always ask, what is the objective of modern feminism, especially to the African woman? Especially because the template is coming not from the African woman, is it?
We are borrowing it from the West.
But personally, I think majority of, and this is a very biased opinion.
And that's
It's my,
okay.
I think that majority of women issues in Africa will be solved by decolonization rather than femininity, or sorry, rather than feminism. Yeah. So let's look at African women now and colonialism. How has colonialism affected how they're living their lives now?
Okay, maybe I spoke too fast when I said that was my favorite question.
It was.
No, this is
Yeah.
the ultimate.
Yeah.
First off, can I just radically disagree with what you said about decolonization solving most of women's problems? I think it would solve a huge amount of women's problems. In the same way, I am Pan-Africanist. In the same way, I want to raise the status and the humanity of African people. But the position of the African woman is so distinct, and that's why I identify as Afro-feminist, because I believe there's problems African women face by the virtue of being African women that only they themselves can solve, right? And so when I say, well, decolonization can save us, or can kind of raise the quality of our lives as African women, I still think we'd have to deal with African patriarchy. Right. And the reason I'm disagreeing with you with this is because I've had conversations with Pan-Africanists, right? And in their collective dream of the Ubuntu lifestyle, I would ask, so what is the reality of African women in this space? And the difference now, every time in their imagination was still limited to patriarchal ideals. So to them, every time I would hear, so now we are not serving white masters, but as an African woman, I'm still serving African men, right? So decolonization will save us from imperialism and internalized white femininities. I'm an African woman. Why would I be aspiring to white beauty ideals? I still think we have issues to solve just as African women, because once we solve decolonization, we still have to solve our dynamics with the African men, which are a bit more different, right? But when you say the realities of African women in the colonial context, in fact, I think one of the issues we faced was, because as African women, I like to say we were double colonized, right? It's not enough that we were colonized as women and as Africans, right? Because men were only colonized as African men, but because white colonialism came here with patriarchy or white patriarchy. So now not only are you like a slave or a semi-human, you're a semi-human for being African, but also you realize they came there already devaluing their women. So now already you being a woman, you have lesser humanity, but now also you're African, right? And so I think that's where I think Africa patriarchy has always been in most societies, let's be honest. But the introduction of colonization to us kind of cemented patriarchy. And don't forget, they also brought us their religion, which centers patriarchy, you see? So while decolonization would remove most aspects, I think there's still internalized stuff we'd have to deal with as the locals, Africans to Africans with Africans.
Mayo. I feel like getting into the issue of Afrofeminism.
We can.
But I think we'll leave that for the next episode.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about, let's continue with decolonization. Talk to me about the colonization of time. Yeah, because I think majority of our problem, especially when you're talking about mental health, again, it's mental health month, is we don't know how to rest. I know that sounds ridiculous. Like, what do you
It
know? You don't know
doesn't.
how to rest.
No, it
You know,
doesn't.
tu unalala, ala. But the thing is, since capitalism was beaten into us, it has glorified this
Constant productivity.
constant productivity. Thank you. That if you're resting, then I must be a piece of something.
You're useless.
It must be.
You're not churning profits. You're not productive to make profit for the big five. Look at you. You're not
Yeah.
serious. Mhm.
Yeah. And I think that somehow affects us not just mentally, but also physically, because we're in a constant state of exhaustion, which makes us very moldable and easy to manipulate, right?
And-
Yeah.
Mhm.
So, can we talk a little about the colonization of time, how that affects the psyche, how that affects person on an individual level?
Okay, fine. Now this is my favorite. Fine, they're all my
Nothing.
they're all my favorites. Literally, zote ni zangu. I like, in fact, when you say the colonization of time, I like that that's where you went. Because immediately that, when you said that, that's not what came to mind. What came to mind is, as Africans already, how we, our identity and our culture around time has always been, because now with the modern productivity and capitalism, we have a watch to tell us saa nane unafaa ukuwe umetoka hapa, unafaa ukule by saa saba. I don't think that's what we are doing. And I'm only saying that based on how foreign it feels to me. It's like something in my body tells me, this is not how we do it. Think about it, okay? Now you have, because now even our cycles and our days ziko built in, because day ndio unafaa ukuwe productive, day ndio unafaa ufanye kazi na nini. Now nights we have to sleep, right? I feel like we have always had a difference, a difference in how we perceive time, and also the linear thinking of time. I don't think that's an African school of thought. Sisi, our idea of time always imekuwa a bit more cyclical, right? But in capitalism ni work 2 years, get experience, and then be promoted, and then do this. But I don't think those are our ideas of time. Sisi always tumekuwa wale wa the grandmothers na the kids. Are you getting what I'm saying? Our idea of time has always been a bit more cyclical, more communal, more circular. But also when you say the idea of rest, because rest now is a radical concept. It sounds ridiculous, but rest now is rebellion, because why our times are colonized. Tumeenda mbali. I feel like capitalism at the core pretends that you're selling labor, but I think you sell time. That's the thing. You go to an office 9 to 5, you sell time. That's why office jobs, if you've been to an office watakwambia, you'd rather just be there and do nothing, but usikose kuwa hapo. Kuwa tu hapo tukuone kwa hiyo kona office. So definitely, I think, in fact, I would say this is one of the non-obvious impacts of colonization on our psyche. How we look at time now is vastly, radically different to how we were looking at time before. Yes.
Oh my gosh. I think they're not just selling time. You said they're selling
Time. I think that's the core thing we sell to capitalists.
Let me cook. I just thought of something now. Do you feel like when capitalism was introduced, it took away rest, and now it's just about to be sold to us? Listen to this. What is we sell to you massage as self-care? How much do you have to pay for
Spa day.
for spa day, for yoga or meditation, for
Vacations. The list goes on.
vacations? And now it's like, okay, you have to work, but if you want to rest, you have to buy it.
That's beautiful. You know her, our mutual friend likes to say, buy back your time. But now it's like, no, not only are we buying back time, we are buying rest. That makes sense, because capitalism only values things that bring about profit, right? And when you're resting, not only are you not bringing profit, you're being a liability. You're not in the factory, you're not on the Excel sheet or using your Power BI softwares, making profit, talking to clients, doing all these CRMs and stuff, right? So now if you want to rest, because essentially it's telling you have to compensate, because this is the time you'd be making us something. So if you're not going to be making us money, you're going to have to give us your money. Literally. No, literally.
It sounds ridiculous,
It sounds
but
ridiculous.
it's true and it's sad. Yeah.
You know what? Try applying that theory to just most things. It's like we are taking it away because it's not making us money, but we know it's important to you and it's necessary, so we're going to bring it back in a way that brings us profit and makes also you easier to control, because again, if you're devoid of rest, you're weak, you're
weak,
tired, your mind is not functioning, you're not
Yeah.
functioning at optimal levels,
moldable, gullible.
susceptible.
Yeah.
That you cooked, you baked, no crabs left.
Yeah. My gosh. So after that, let me go to my favorite question.
All right.
So I think I'll start with let me cook a little.
Cook a little. You great.
I'm doing a project on. It's more of a research on our modalities of knowing as Africans, because majority of the time we are told this is science as long as it comes from the West, but anything that comes from Africa or even other places, but let's focus on Africa. It's primitive. It has not been tested yet. Or how do they say it in scientific terms? It has not been tested or
Peer
the results
reviewed.
peer reviewed. Thank you. Which brings this erroneous notion that experts can only come from the West. Right? But when you look at majority of African communities, or even most communities out there was no distinction between what we knew or with spirituality. It was one, let's say art, let's say
Fashion, literature,
science, yeah, spirituality. They were all one thing to a point where you don't need to give them a name. And I feel like it's only in the Western society where they were so focused on religion. Like if you look at their histories and how brutal their religious uprisings were, they were so focused on religion to a point where if they needed to do fact finding for something, it had to be given a name, science, which made it seem like it was something separate. But in reality, I feel like majority of these things are just intertwined. Like when we're looking at spirituality and psychology, they almost, if you see the impact of spirituality on psychology, my gosh. And it's one of the reasons why I was motivated to write the book Illuminate the Mind, because then we get to demystify spirituality. It was kept in this bubble of magic and abracadabra, to a point where if you wanted spirituality, you need to go to someone who seemed to know more. But at the end of the day, you find that spirituality, psychology, quantum physics, which is a new thing, by the way, and all these things can be enmeshed to form one truth. It's like they're just parts and pieces of truth, and then you can just bring them together to form truth. So now that we're talking about spirituality, I want us to talk about the colonization of our consciousness through the colonization of our spirituality.
Can I interrupt you to just make a comment on what you
Please,
said?
please do.
The scientific term for what you called all that modalities of knowledge production, African knowledge production, the philosophical term for it is called epistemological violence, right? The epistemology is the branch of philosophy that deals with knowledge. And there's actually a whole lot of research on this side that it's a kind of, I personally like to call it knowledge imperialism, right? When something is African, we are already very in doubt, but we can also go ahead and even talk about how the big publishers of like scientific journals and stuff are based in Europe. So which means European journals get more peer reviewed, they get more exposure in that. So now they seem more expertly. But when you look at it well, often there's no serious difference. And when you say to them, they need to divide and do all these things, it's a very colonial school of thinking. I call it the binarized thinking, where you're either pagan or religious, right? You're black or white, conforming or a danger to the status quo. That's not us. For us, things have always been, we are a very enmeshing, very intersecting, interconnecting people. So we definitely need to talk about that, because in fact, this is one of the things I was intending to say. One of the violences we faced that maybe now in the academic and scholarly side, it's getting a bit more like traction, but not like in day-to-day things. It's the violence our knowledge systems and our knowledges has gone through just by the virtue of being African. And that's for the ones that stood the test of time and history. Some are erased. Like we will truly never know why. And also another key issue is because when these people came here, history to them has to be written. So when they come to this land and we are not more writers, we want to do folklores and tales and pass them, again, building our community through telling our stories. And they come here and they're like, you guys don't have books. And in fact, we had books, but specifically our side of telling our story has never been centered on, because you only have to write a history as a. I look at history often as a sign: I dominated you and I conquered you. I am the hunter that killed the lion, so I get to write my story. But because
And your story.
right,
Yeah.
of course, I say, the lion was smiling. In fact, it wanted me to. Yeah, so I like that you said that, because the violence African knowledges and African knowledge production systems have gone through, I don't think we are ready for that.
But I think we need to look into how their wisdom that they had before it was taken away. Because I think there's a lot of misconception that we're just people who are just in the bushes. Come on,
Hunting
really?
gorillas.
Yeah, because if you look at actual history or truth of what happened, it's before the 15th century, the world was more like at par. All communities seemed to be at the same level, right? So how did one community get to build bigger than another? Isn't it through violence? Isn't it through forcing people to work for you?
Yeah, subordinating their consciousness and their humanity.
Yeah, yeah. But back to the question of decolonizing our spirituality. What do you think that is doing to us even today? If we're looking, because I don't watch the news much because it can be depressing.
It is. It is.
But lately I've been watching, and every month there'll be a story of a cult somewhere
In the African landmass, or just in the global world?
in Kenya.
Sorry.
So I'm getting in the African landmass, it's crazy,
Why
crazy
da?
numbers.
I'm sorry, isn't that not a recession indicator? What are you saying every day we are having? How did we get here? Ni nini, guys? I didn't know that.
Yeah, and I'm like, another one, another one. And I'm like, maybe the foundation is wrong because we cannot just be blaming.
Every day
Yeah.
it's colonialism, or what are you saying?
Actually, I think that's where everything went wrong. Because if we have a wrong foundation of spirituality, then the interpretations will be ridiculous.
Absurd.
Because they're not coming from us anyway, are they? So we're just interpreting from where we see fit. How many versions of let me just put it straight, of the Bible stories do we have? How many interpretations
How
do we
many
have?
books have been redacted? How many translations into different languages?
Different languages is fine. I'm talking about you have one verse and it's interpreted into 1,000 times. Like if you're looking at let's look at maybe the creation story.
Okay.
Because most people ask, did they actually eat a fruit? I'll tell you the number of versions I've had of preachers who said this is what may have happened during the creation story. Number one, yes, they indeed ate an apple. Number two, it was more like magic mushrooms. Number three, no, it wasn't eating an apple. It was symbolism. Meaning they had sex.
They mated.
They mated. And if you go into that, a lot of interpretations.
Like, do we even have the time?
Okay, so which is which? And maybe we cannot come to a consensus of which is which, but my issue is not that. My issue is we did not create these stories. They were told to us. I think we had our own belief systems of how everything began, right? What's to say that they were wrong? But if we are having something foreign, then of course we'll have different interpretations because we don't know where it's from. We don't know what they were thinking when they were writing
Yeah,
it.
we come from different contexts and experiences.
Yeah. Our version of heaven is not, because if you look at milk and honey, ukiambia mtu wa Nyandarua, you're going to
Hakuna
somewhere
waru.
there's milk. They have milk already.
I'm like, so I'm in heaven. Yeah.
They're like, so and I feel like once the foundation is wrong of spirituality, your version of spirituality has already been colonized. Your view of divinity doesn't look like you, right?
Absolutely.
Isn't that what's happening now?
Absolutely.
It doesn't look like you. There is need for blind loyalty to, yeah.
So would you say, it's just a question, so would you say then there's an element to us adapting religions that are not ours that could lead to religious psychosis? I know we're on the spiritual side, but I'm just curious, right? Is it one of those things we are saying because we're just picking dresses that are not ours? Are we then surprised we're going mad in them? Would you say that's why we are interpreting these things in very wild, dangerous manners? Would you say that?
Yes, yes. But I think that's kind of to an extreme end.
Okay.
But also, when we are talking about spirituality, spirituality is in tandem with identity, with belonging, with knowing who you are or how you see yourself. If divinity doesn't look anything like you, then that tells a lot about how you see yourself, right? Subordinate, maybe.
Okay, I don't have favorites at this point.
Yeah.
Because, can I interrupt you just a minute?
Okay.
That has always been my whole issue with like religiosity as has been brought to us by whiteness, right? Because if you're telling me, one, this God is a man, I'm a woman, why can't my God not look like me? But also, not only are they male, they are, of course, they are as painted, they should be Middle Eastern, but have you been to these African households where there's this picture of Jesus that it's a white man with long hair? I am right. If you put a white man here,
Also, the actor is called Ian Kasich. He's the one who acted the 100.
right? Do you see the ridiculousness of it? It's like you're praying. If this is a white man, I would like to say I'm there on that spectrum. I'm on this end. I'm a black woman, and God, you are made in God's image. So this image, I'm seeing a white
Doesn't
male.
look right.
Yeah.
And at times I don't have a problem if we are able to like. I don't want to say this because I know
It's fine.
majority of people have a problem in the spaces that I've been. Because there's a lecturer who once said in a lecture that I was in that our solution will be to Africanize these religions. And like, I don't know how that would work, but even if we did, wouldn't it be better for something to come to from us? Because spirituality, at the end of the day, if you demystify it, it's all about who you are, long before it's about something external.
A divine deity.
Yeah. And that's why I'm asking this question. How do we decolonize our spirituality? Because then, if our spirituality is colonized, then our minds are colonized. If our minds are colonized, our actions are colonized, which means we'll be going through the same loop of everything that we do not want to happen, happening again and again and again, because we are living on a software that's not ours. How? Talk to me about the decolonization of spirituality.
First off, for what your lecturer said, for what the lecturer for the lecture you're in said, I think in my pursuit of liberation on different sects, I think my thinking has evolved so much that squeezy, if I'm seeking liberation from, let's say, colonialism or patriarchy, I move outside of a patriarchal imagination. Because if you're saying we need to Africanize these things, I'm like, why don't we just build the inherently Africans? Why do I have to Africanize the English language or Africanize the English religion? Why not build my entirely African religion? Because I think my whole issue with that idea of thinking is we are still finding solutions in this mess, in this school of oppression. So why not move entirely outside of it? So in fact, while I understand we are speaking about decolonizing spirituality in it, but why are we still seeking to polish already colonized spirituality? Why not just build an entirely different sect of spirituality as know it? But now again, not unless the discussion is because we are Africans and we've already been colonized, which means any spirituality that comes out of us might be already colonized and we'd have to decolonize it. But I would say let's build an entirely different school of, but are you getting like where I'm going? So we have to get away from the colonized imagination or thinking.
Do you think that's viable? Do you think that's practical to start building fresh?
I think it's, do you know why I say I think it's even more practical? One, because I'm not saying that we build it without having, because the times have changed, we have access to this all knowledges and infrastructure. I think it is more viable to build only because now we have more resources, right? We are starting afresh instead of taking these high level concepts and institutions and trying to make them fit into Africanness when we can already have these resources to build something entirely African. I feel like, in fact, there are more pros, and it is much less work than trying to Africanize these things. Because let's be honest, well, these things were built inherently anti-African. So we are already starting from a point of trying to get ourselves into systems that don't want us. Why not just start from, okay, this is our table. I know the wood might not look okay, Nini, but it's ours. And we've started it and we've built it so that later our future generations are not told, even that thing you have, because you think you've Africanized it, it's yours. It's still mine. We gave it to you. Because, and I'm only saying this because I've seen it happen to different oppressed people, where when women take masculine things and they feminize them, they're still told, but wababa waliwapea hii. So now sisi pia tunakuja kuambiwa, but wazungu waliwapea because you think you Africanized English, you think it's your language. No, because even today when we're speaking about decolonizing language and stuff, there's still conversations of, I went to this conference about decolonization, and of course we were talking about decolonizing language. And for one day of the conference, we were talking about if English is an African language. You see, but the fact that we're still having these discussions, and people are like, no, it was brought to you. And people are like, but languages are always brought everywhere, just because they were saying, I think the main argument there was, the only reason you claim Swahili is yours and Bantu is yours is because it got to you first. But even English finally got you. So why can't English be yours? Why? Because now English is tied to whiteness. And because we're not white, we can't possess it. So I'm saying it's more viable for us to build it so that we can own it and stand on these tables and say we built it. We didn't polish tables that are not ours. Yeah. What do
Yeah.
you think about that?
About what you've said.
Yeah.
Um, First, I agree with you. I like your answer. Personally, there was a time I used to do all this talk of self-awareness and decolonization and consciousness because I thought that once people were decolonized and were conscious, they would make certain decisions and they would look a certain way. But I've gotten to a point where even as I'm doing the talks on decolonization and self-awareness, I do not hold any expectation on how it will look like. I think I made peace. At some point, it made me sick to think about like how we are being used by religion over and over and over again. But I've gotten to a point where I realized it's not in this generation or the next will it be completely eradicated. So the thing isn't in removing it for me, it's in promoting self-awareness. And if more people are conscious, then they're able to make decisions that work for them rather than being on a software of someone else, meaning consciously they think they're doing something for themselves, but it's benefiting someone else. Yeah.
That's powerful.
So I'm like, if we are conscious on an individual level, then even on a community level, then our societies will be probably more conscious, make different decisions. I don't know how that will look like. I cannot say go back to the religions we had or the spirituality we had before. I don't think we have enough information for that. And even if we did, it probably wouldn't be practical now. So I don't put any expectation on how it will look like. All I'm working for is the self-awareness.
You've said something so beautiful and so futuristic that I hope if anyone in any capacity is seeking enlightenment or liberation, and it is, what if it doesn't look the way we picture it? Right? Because we come to these ideologies and these schools of thoughts and these revolutions thinking when we arrive, who tells you there's a destination? Let's even start there. And who tells you the destination that is there, if it's there, looks how you picture it? Yeah. I think that's one thing we're going to have to be okay with. Again, it all goes back to idealizing the escape. You think, okay, fine, now that I'm no longer a slave, life is good. And then you come out here and you realize you do not have the currency, whether it's money or whiteness or maleness, and you realize, okay, wait, and it's a whole different story. But now you realize I made an informed choice. I did not know how this reality looks like. As you said, yeah, here, if you think having expectations in like romantic relationships will show you dust, try having expectations here. You'll
Yeah.
see bad things.
That throwback.
Uko like, oh, kwani nimefikaje kwa desert?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
I think coming towards the end, one of the reasons why I really wanted it to be you to have this conversation with on decoloniality and the impact on our psyche is because you've been in this space of decolonization. You went to a conference in Cape Town recently, right, on decolonization.
Yeah, decolonizing religion, yeah, specifically. Yeah,
Ooh.
yeah, yeah. It was decolonizing religion, but of course, because it's like a whole week, so now you'll start with what are we decolonizing, and then later we'll come to the mind, the education, the language, the spiritualities. But yeah, it was specifically decolonizing religion. I don't remember if it was decolonizing African religions. Oh, it was decolonizing African religions and spiritualities. Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. Can you please share a bit of wisdom from what you learned?
To be fair, I learned a lot. But the thing about not to be one of those gatekeepers, I'm not gatekeeping knowledge, guys, okay? But you just know academic conversations at advanced levels get very philosophical. So now we are even defining, is it African spirituality or spiritualities, right? But there's I think there was an interesting professor there, and I think this was my key takeaway, right? And he said the issue about being African is, this is not, so I'm kind of just paraphrasing it, but he said, as pertains to African religions and spirituality, it's like we are always behind Europe, right? So things happen in Europe, these revolutions and enlightenment, and then we find ourselves, because they have gone there first, we find ourselves taking their structures and their frameworks. So I think that's the key issue that came to me of, and that's why, again, my whole idea is rebuilding and not kind of, polishing and doing all this. It's because we are always taking from them. So I would say we have to build something new. Else we will always be copying them, because they've already gone to their enlightenment, their dark eras, their middle ages. But because we are technically behind, or we are still a younger continent, we are copying them. But it was very clear. Anyways, and the key issue, I remember, like for 2 days, we discussed if it's African spirituality or spiritualities, because again, they manifest differently. And if what makes it an African spirituality? Is it a spirituality by an African, or that practices Africanness? But, yeah, but I learned a few things.
Yeah. I'm liking these spaces a lot. And I think the reason I asked that question was at times I wonder what is the objective of the objectivity of those, because majority of the time when you look at the people who are actually interested in the conferences themselves, are not the people who have gone through colonization. So
Oh, now we are getting a very radical and controversial. Okay.
yeah, so I don't know.
Just say it. These things are funded by white money. So, because we are jumping into it.
Yeah.
In fact, these are conversations that have popped up to me in such spaces, where even the people in these spaces, we are like, okay, are they here to know, like, what are the oppressed, what are the strategies so that we can outsmart them? Like, what is the goal? I get what you're saying, right? Because again, what interests do these like conferences serve? What are they meant to achieve? Ama acha tuongee mambo ya KPI. KPI hapa hivi ni gani? Now what is the end game? So I like that you've asked that. Shida ni, how do we know? How can we definitively say that we know this is the purpose of these things?
I think, of course, they will meet the objectives. I think it will take a bit longer if the
My
people
problem is,
who
what are
are
the objectives? The true objectives.
the true objective. Yeah, it makes us wonder what the objective, the hidden objectives are.
What's the catch?
But I guess we will get our decolonization at some point. It will just take longer if the people who are actually being decolonized are not participating in it. Then it becomes maybe a form of new colonialism. Does
Interesting.
it? I don't know. Maybe we can discuss that
Later.
yeah, on the next episode. But since we are coming to the end of this amazing session, there's one question I'd like to ask. I ask everyone every time I meet someone new. What's the most unhinged thing you can say about self-awareness? The one thing that you're like, it's weird, but I do it. and it helps me become more self-aware.
I think it's having a very radical, it's having a relationship with shame that is rooted in radical acceptance.
Wow, shame.
Yes,
I love that.
absolutely.
I love
Absolutely.
that.
It's build a relationship with shame because when you grow up,
Mm-hmm.
okay, based on however or where you grow up, you're told, okay, this is how you can be or you should be. Okay. And one of the weapons society uses to ensure people stay in their boxes is shame. Right. So in time, again, it always goes back to what if the thing you find there is not what you're looking for or what you think should be there? So it comes back to if I have no shame here, whatever it is I find in the vast ocean that is myself, I am okay with it. So yeah, a relationship with shame or shamelessness rooted in radical acceptance. That's how I would say it.
Thank you. Nothing can be added to that. Thank you so much, Michelle,
Thank you,
for
Hyland, for
that
having
amazing
me.
session. Thank you guys for joining us. If you like this content, if you think someone else, maybe a friend or family, would love this content, please share it to them. And don't forget to subscribe if you would like more of this. Thank you. Bye.